The auction grounds were bustling with activity, but none of the noise seemed to reach the small corner where an old dog sat alone in a rusted cage. The afternoon sun poured relentlessly over the dusty yard, baking the dirt and casting long shadows. Flies buzzed lazily around the cage bars, but the dog paid them no mind. He sat quietly, his grey muzzle resting against his paws, eyes half closed yet alert. He was a German shepherd, or at least once had been. His coat was patchy and matted, stained by years of neglect. His ribs were visible beneath sagging skin, and his eyes, though cloudy with age, held a strange dignity. Not a whimper escaped him, nor a bark. He simply waited, as if resigned to whatever fate the day might bring. Nearby, the auctioneer's booming voice echoed over the crowd, announcing livestock and goods. Cattle were being sold by the dozen, goats were spiritedly bidding wars, and pigs squealed impatiently in their pens. But the old dog, no one seemed interested. People shuffled, past, some glancing briefly with pity, others with disdain. "Too old," a farmer muttered to his companion. "Won't do any good herding cattle." Another chuckled. "He's probably blind, or worse." A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve, pointing to the cage, but was quickly pulled away. The auctioneer, a burly man with greying hair, glanced down at the list in his hand. "Item 42, shepherd mix, no papers, no known owner," he said with a shrug. "Looks like he's been here a while. Anyone want him?" A few laughed, others shook their heads. "No bids," someone called out. "Guess he's unwanted," said a voice from the back. "Better off put down," another said quietly but firmly. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Standing a few steps behind the crowd, leaning against a weathered wooden post, was a man who had been watching quietly the entire time. Elias Hart was a figure the town knew, but rarely saw in public. His clothes were simple: faded denim jeans, a worn flannel shirt, and sturdy boots, caked with mud. His hair was silver, and deep lines etched his face. His eyes, though tired, held something that the others didn't see, a softness, a memory. He had come to town that day to buy feed and supplies for his small farm on the outskirts. Auctions were not his usual place, but the sight of the dog stirred something inside him. As the auctioneer prepared to move on, Elias raised a rough hand and called out, $1! Heads turned. A hush fell. "Did he say $1? The auctioneer asked, bemused. "I'll take the dog." $1, Elias repeated quietly but firmly. There were murmurs of surprise and some snickers. "The old man's lost his mind," someone muttered, but Elias didn't flinch. "Sold," the auctioneer said with a grin, tapping his gavel. "You got yourself an old shepherd." Elias stepped forward. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn key, and unlocked the cage. The dog rose slowly, his joints creaking. His paws shuffled uncertainly on the dusty ground, but he followed Elias without hesitation. No one offered help, and no one cheered. They just watched, some with pity, others with disbelief. Elias knelt and placed a gentle hand on the dog's head. The dog looked up at him, eyes meeting his with something that felt like trust, perhaps even hope. "You're coming home with me," Elias whispered, clipping the leash onto the dog's battered collar. The dog's tail twitched. It was a small gesture, but it was the first sign of life the old dog had shown in a long time. Elias turned and began walking away from the auction, the dog following faithfully at his side. The crowd parted quietly as he passed, some still shaking their heads, others watching with a hint of curiosity. That day, the old dog who no one wanted left the auction with a humble man who saw something more than age and weariness. And though no one knew it yet, this was the beginning of a story that would change both their lives and the whole town's heart, forever. Elias walked slowly along the gravel road that led away from the auction grounds, the old dog limping faithfully beside him. The sun was beginning to dip behind the distant hills, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. Dust rose in soft clouds with every step, and the quiet was only broken by the occasional bark from a faraway farm. The dog's name was Buddy, though Elias hadn't said it aloud yet. For now, the old dog was simply the dog, a silent companion, trudging alongside a man who seemed as weathered and worn as the animal itself. Elias's farmhouse was nothing grand. It sat perched on the edge of a wide field, its wooden siding faded by years of sun and storms. The paint peeled in places, and the porch sagged just slightly, but it was home. At least, it had been before the silence had crept in. The man hadn't always been alone. Years ago his wife had passed, leaving the house filled with memories and quiet shadows. His children had grown and moved away, building lives in cities far from the dusty country roads. Elias's days were now measured by routine and solitude, but today everything felt different. When he unlocked the creaky gate to the yard, Buddy hesitated, then stepped forward carefully. Elias could see the stiffness in the dog's legs and the way his breath came in shallow pants. But there was something in Buddy's eyes, an ember that refused to die. Inside the house, Elias fetched a bowl and filled it with water. Buddy drank, eagerly gulping as if he feared it would disappear. Then Elias found some old scraps of meat from the fridge, warmed them gently, and set the bowl down. The dog sniffed cautiously before taking a few bites, his tail giving a tentative wag. For a moment, the two simply sat together, sharing the quiet. Elias reached out a rough hand and stroked Buddy's fur, amazed at how soft it still was despite everything. "You're safe now," he said softly. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." That night, the wind whispered outside, rattling the windows. Buddy curled up by the fire, his breathing slowing, finally finding rest. Elias sat in his worn armchair, staring into the flickering flames, feeling a strange warmth spread through him. Over the next few days, the two began to settle into a routine. Elias tended to Buddy's wounds, cleaning scabs and brushing out the mats in his fur. Buddy followed Elias everywhere, slow at first, then with a growing steadiness. Word of the purchase traveled quickly through town. Some whispered behind Elias's back. "Why would he want that old mutt?" one neighbor scoffed. "A waste of money, if you ask me." But Elias didn't care what they thought. To him, Buddy was more than just an old dog. He was a companion, a reminder of better times, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at something new. One afternoon, Elias took Buddy for a slow walk around the property. The dog's gait was uneven, but with every step his confidence grew. At one point, Buddy stopped to sniff a patch of wildflowers, his tail lifting just a little. Elias smiled. "Slow and steady, old friend," he said. "We'll get you back on your feet." That evening, as Elias prepared a simple meal, he found himself talking to Buddy as if the dog could understand every word. He shared stories from long ago, stories of his childhood on this very land, of his wife's laughter, and the dogs they had raised together. Buddy listened quietly, eyes brightening with each word. Despite the town's skepticism, Elias began to feel a spark of hope. The old dog was teaching him something important, that even when the world seems to forget you, there is always a chance to be loved again. The next morning, Elias found Buddy waiting at the door, tail wagging with something close to joy. It was a small victory, but to Elias it meant everything. In the days that followed, neighbors who had once dismissed Elias and the dog started to soften. The local vet stopped by unannounced, offering medicine and advice. A few children waved from the school bus, calling out, "Hi, Buddy." And Elias, he finally felt the tight knot of loneliness loosen just a bit. Sometimes the smallest acts, like saving an old dog no one wanted, can open the door to something greater. As Elias sat on the porch that evening, Buddy resting his head on his knee, he knew this was only the beginning of their journey together. The sun rose early over the sleepy town, casting golden streaks across the fields that stretched beyond Elias's farmhouse. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and dew, yet inside the old farmhouse, the quiet was filled with something new, a growing bond between man and dog. Buddy moved slowly but with purpose, following Elias from room to room. The stiffness in his legs hadn't disappeared, but it was easing, and with every step the dog seemed to regain a fragment of his former strength. At the breakfast table, Elias carefully poured water into Buddy's bowl. The dog approached it with hesitation, then lapped eagerly. Elias watched with a small, hopeful smile. Outside, the world was waking up, but inside Elias's home, something extraordinary was unfolding. Two lost souls finding their way back to life. That same morning, back in town, The memory of the auction still lingered in whispers. "Did you see Elias Hart's bid on that old dog?" a woman asked at the grocery store. $1, can you believe it? "Foolish," her friend replied. "Why waste time and money on a dog that can barely walk?" But others felt a different stirring. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who had lived in the town for decades, paused thoughtfully. "Maybe that man sees what we don't," she said softly. Meanwhile, Elias worked on the farm, moving slowly but steadily. He repaired a broken fence post and tended to a patch of wildflowers near the porch. Buddy followed, occasionally limping, but always close. That afternoon, Elias received a surprise visitor. The town's vet, Dr. Morrison, knocked on the door. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, well respected in the community. "I heard about your new friend," he said. "Mind if I take a look?" Elias nodded, grateful. Dr. Morrison knelt beside Buddy, examining his joints and old wounds. "He's in rough shape, but with care he could improve," the vet said. "Age isn't everything. Dogs like Buddy can surprise you." Elias felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, doctor. I just want him to be comfortable." Dr. Morrison smiled. "You've done well just by taking him in." Word spread quickly of the vet's visit. People started to see Buddy not as a burden, but as a symbol of hope and kindness. Some neighbors even stopped by with blankets, food, and words of encouragement. At the same time, Elias made small improvements to his home. He fixed the loose boards on the porch and cleared a path through the overgrown garden. Every day, Buddy grew a little stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias sat on the porch with Buddy at his feet. He thought back to the auction, the laughter, the dismissive voices, the cold cage. "Not anymore, old boy," Elias said softly. "No one will turn their back on you again." Buddy lifted his head and looked at Elias with eyes full of trust. That night, they slept close together, the bond between them growing deeper, but life wasn't done testing them yet. One morning, Elias received a call from the auctioneer. "There's been talk about the dog," he said. "Some folks want to meet him." Curious and a bit wary, Elias agreed. That afternoon, a small group gathered at the farmhouse. Neighbors, curious onlookers, and even a few who had once mocked the dog's fate. Elias watched as Buddy, despite his age and scars, greeted them with quiet dignity. The crowd murmured in surprise. "He's not just an old dog," someone said. "He's a survivor." Elias smiled. "He's more than that. He's my friend." That moment marked a turning point. Buddy was no longer the forgotten dog at auction. He was a living testament to compassion and second chances. And Elias? He realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could ripple through a community, changing hearts and lives. As twilight fell, Elias and Buddy sat together beneath the stars. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time while hope shone brightly. The weeks following the visit from the neighbors and the vet brought subtle but powerful changes to Elias's quiet farm. The once worn-down farmhouse now seemed to breathe with a renewed spirit, as if Buddy's presence had breathed life back into its very walls. Each morning, Elias rose before dawn, carrying out his chores with a quiet determination. Buddy, though, slow, never failed to greet the day by limping toward Elias's side, tail wagging faintly. Their silent companionship became the rhythm of the farm, two old souls leaning on each other. Elias spent hours caring for Buddy's injuries. He cleaned sores, massaged stiff joints, and prepared special meals to coax nourishment into the dog's weakened body. The effort was painstaking and slow, but every day brought small signs of improvement. One chilly morning, Elias found Buddy sitting outside the porch, staring intently at the horizon. The dog's ears perked up as a distant bird call pierced the stillness. Elias joined him, feeling an odd sense of peace. "You're stronger than I thought," Elias murmured. "Maybe you still have a few adventures left in you." The old dog seemed to nod, or perhaps it was Elias's imagination, but the bond between them grew stronger with every shared sunrise and quiet evening. Despite the progress, Elias knew Buddy's health was fragile. The dog's breathing was labored at times, and the once sharp amber eyes sometimes clouded with confusion. Elias often caught himself worrying, imagining the day when his faithful companion might slip away. One afternoon, a knock at the door startled Elias. It was Mary, the schoolteacher from town, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables and a warm blanket. She smiled warmly, her eyes soft with understanding. "I thought Buddy might like these," she said. "And you too." Elias welcomed her inside. Over tea they talked quietly about the town, its people, and the changes Buddy's arrival had inspired. Mary confessed she'd once doubted Elias's choice, but now saw the dog as a symbol of hope. "Sometimes the quietest hearts teach us the most," she said softly. Mary's visits became more frequent. She would bring supplies, share stories, and sit with Elias as they watched Buddy doze peacefully by the fire. The farmhouse, once a place of solitude, began to feel less lonely. One evening, as twilight settled over the fields, Elias found himself laughing softly at a story Mary shared. Buddy's ears twitched, and the old dog shuffled closer, nudging Elias's hand with a cold nose. That night, Elias dreamed of his wife. In the dream, she smiled and patted Buddy's head. "You did a good thing," she whispered. Elias awoke with tears on his cheeks but felt lighter than he had in years. As spring edged closer, Buddy's condition slowly improved. The limping became less pronounced. His tail wagged a little more. Eagerly. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough. One afternoon, Elias took Buddy for a slow walk around the yard. The dog paused by a patch of blooming wildflowers and sniffed the air, eyes bright with curiosity. Elias knelt beside him, breathless, with emotion. "We've come a long way, haven't we, old friend?" Buddy looked up and rested his head on Elias's knee, a quiet promise in his eyes. That night Elias sat on the porch, the stars overhead twinkling like distant beacons. He realized that healing wasn't just physical. It was something deeper. A restoration of trust, love, and purpose. Buddy had found a home again, and in doing so Elias had found a reason to hope. Spring had fully embraced the countryside, filling the air with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth. The farm was alive with the gentle hum of insects and the soft rustle of new leaves on the trees. Elias and Buddy had settled into a comfortable routine, their quiet companionship a balm to the loneliness that once haunted the old farmhouse. One bright morning, Elias was fixing the fence near the barn when he heard the crunch of footsteps approaching. He wiped his hands on his worn jeans and looked up to see a young woman walking down the path, carrying a canvas bag. She smiled warmly, her eyes shining with kindness. "Hello, Mr. Hart," she said. "My name's Emma. I'm a volunteer from the local animal shelter. We heard about Buddy." Elias felt a flicker of surprise. "You did? I didn't expect anyone to take an interest." Emma nodded. "Buddy's story touched a lot of people. We've been following his progress, and we wanted to see if there's anything we can do to help." Elias invited her inside, where Buddy lay on the rug by the fire. The dog lifted his head and wagged his tail tentatively, as if sensing the good intentions of the visitor. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a small box filled with medicines, nutritional supplements, and a few toys. She also had pamphlets about senior dog care and advice on physical therapy. "Buddy's lucky to have you," Emma said softly. "Not many dogs get a second chance like this." Elias smiled, humbled. "He's lucky I found him, and maybe I'm lucky too." Over. The next hour, Emma carefully examined Buddy, gently checking his joints and muscles. She demonstrated simple exercises Elias could do to help improve the dog's mobility and suggested a special diet to keep Buddy strong. As they talked, Emma shared stories of other rescue dogs she had worked with, dogs that had come from neglect, abuse, or abandonment, and had found new hope through people like Elias. "You never know how much love and patience can change a life," she said. Elias nodded, feeling a deep sense of connection with the woman's mission. Before leaving, Emma handed Elias her card. "If you ever need anything or just want to share updates, please don't hesitate to call." After Emma left, Elias sat quietly with Buddy, who seemed almost energized by the visit. That day, the farmhouse felt brighter, filled with the promise of new possibilities. Word of Emma's visit spread quickly. Neighbors who had once viewed Elias and Buddy with skepticism now saw the pair in a different light. The community, once indifferent, was beginning to rally around the story of the old dog and the humble man who saved him. One afternoon, a few children from the nearby school came by with a handmade card for Buddy. They shyly patted the dog's head and watched as his tail wagged ever so slightly. Elias felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. The boyhood loneliness that had settled over him for years was lifting. But not everyone in town was pleased. At the edge of town, a wealthy landowner named Mr. Carlton watched the changes with growing disdain. He was known for his pride and influence, and the thought of a humble man like Elias gaining admiration unsettled him. One evening, Mr. Carlton stopped by the auctioneer's office and demanded to know more about Elias's dog. "That mutt doesn't belong in the town story," he sneered. "It's a nuisance." The auctioneer shook his head. "Folks are talking about Buddy and the man who saved him." "Here it's changing people's minds." Carlton's lips curled into a cold smile. "We'll see how long that lasts." Back at the farm, Elias remained unaware of the brewing storm. He was focused on Buddy, helping him grow stronger, finding joy in the small victories. That night, as he sat on the porch, Elias thought about the future. The journey had been hard, but he no longer felt alone. Buddy rested his head on Elias's knee, and for a moment, the world outside the farm seemed to fade away. Elias whispered, "We've come this far, old friend. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The stars twinkled above, silent witnesses to the bond between a man and a dog who refused to be forgotten. The warm days of early summer brought both joy and challenge to Elias and Buddy's world. Buddy's health improved steadily, and the bond between the two grew stronger with every shared moment. They became a familiar sight in the town, a testament to resilience and quiet love, but not everyone welcomed their growing presence. One afternoon, as Elias worked in the garden, he noticed a figure watching from the edge of the property. It was Mr. Carlton, the wealthy landowner who had never warmed to Elias or his simple life. Carlton's gaze was cold, his jaw set in displeasure. Elias's heart tightened. He had hoped the man would leave them alone. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of pink and purple, Elias heard a loud crash from the barn. Rushing inside, he found one of his tools smashed on the floor, its handle broken clean in two. "Who would do this?" Elias muttered, the unease creeping in. Days later, strange noises echoed through the night, footsteps on the porch, faint, shadows slipping past the windows. Elias began locking doors and windows carefully, a protective tension settling over the farm. Buddy sensed the change too. The dog stayed close to Elias, occasionally growling softly at the dark edges of the night. Despite the fear, Elias refused to be driven away. "We're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "This is our home." He reached out to the town sheriff, a fair man named Jenkins, who promised to keep an eye on the farm. Meanwhile, the community that had rallied around Buddy and Elias grew even stronger. Neighbors offered support, bringing meals, helping with chores and keeping watch. The farm, once isolated, became a beacon of kindness in the town. One morning, a letter arrived from the animal shelter. Emma had organized a small fundraiser to help with Buddy's care and to support Elias's efforts. The letter included a generous check and a heartfelt note of encouragement. Elias was moved to tears. "People do care," he whispered. But Mr. Carlton's opposition intensified. He started spreading rumors, painting Elias as a troublemaker and questioning his ability to care for Buddy. The townspeople who once admired Elias found themselves torn, unsure whom to believe. Elias stayed grounded by focusing on Buddy. He followed Dr. Morrison's advice, gently exercising the dog and tending to his health with renewed care. One afternoon, Buddy surprised Elias by standing on his own for a few seconds, wobbly but determined. Elias's eyes filled with tears of joy. "You're stronger than I ever imagined," he said, voice thick with emotion. That evening, Elias shared the news with Mary and Emma, who came to the farm for a visit. They celebrated quietly, understanding that this small victory was a sign of hope. But as the stars twinkled overhead, Elias knew their journey wasn't over. The shadow of opposition still loomed. Yet with Buddy by his side and the community behind him, Elias felt ready to face whatever came next. "We'll stand together," he promised the old dog. "No matter what." And so, under the vast night sky, two unlikely friends prepared to defend their home, their friendship, and the new life they had built from the ashes. The weeks passed with a tense energy lingering in the air. Mr. Carlton's quiet campaign against Elias continued, his influence casting a shadow over the town's once growing support for the humble man and his old dog. Rumors whispered in shop corners, gossip painted Elias as irresponsible, and a few neighbors who had once offered help now hesitated. But amidst the doubt and division, something unexpected began to take shape, a quiet, determined movement of kindness. One morning, as Elias fed Buddy on the porch, a group of townspeople approached, led by Mary and Emma. They carried baskets filled with fresh produce, blankets, and handmade toys for Buddy. "We're here to help," Mary said firmly. "Elias and Buddy are part of this community. They've given us a lesson in compassion." Emma smiled, her eyes bright with hope. "We want to make sure they know they're not alone." Elias felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you," he said simply. "I never expected so much kindness." The neighbors exchanged nods. Slowly but surely, they pledged to stand with Elias, to push back against the negativity Mr. Carlton tried to spread. Word spread quickly, and soon the town organized a community day at the farm. People came from all over, bringing supplies, offering to repair fences, and sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Children played with Buddy, who seemed to find new energy in their laughter. Old Mrs. Jenkins brought homemade biscuits, and the local baker arrived with fresh bread. Elias watched, overwhelmed by the transformation. What had started as a lonely struggle was now a celebration of resilience and unity. But the biggest surprise came when Sheriff Jenkins arrived with a small crowd of officers. They announced an official patrol around the farm and pledged their support to protect the property and its residents. Mr. Carlton's attempts to intimidate Elias had backfired, strengthening the community's resolve. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, Elias sat on the porch with Buddy resting at his feet. The farm was alive with voices and laughter, a sound Elias hadn't heard in years. Mary joined him, her hand warm on his shoulder. "You've done something special here," she said. "You brought us all together." Elias smiled, eyes glistening. "Buddy did. He reminded us what really matters." Just then, Buddy lifted his head and looked toward the barn, alert and attentive. Elias followed his gaze and saw Emma approaching with a small package. "It's from the shelter," Emma said, handing it over. "Some more supplies and a new harness that might help Buddy walk better." Elias took the package gratefully. The little things mattered more than he had realized. As night fell, the farm settled into a peaceful rhythm. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if celebrating the courage of a man and his dog who had turned a simple act of kindness into a movement. Elias whispered into the quiet, "We've come so far, Buddy, and we're not done yet." The dog's eyes met his, full of quiet strength and unwavering trust. Together they looked toward the future, a future built on hope, friendship, and the power of a community united. The summer sun warmed the farm as the final chapter of Elias and Buddy's journey unfolded. The once forgotten old dog, now a symbol of hope and perseverance, had transformed not only Elias's life, but the entire town's spirit. Months had passed since that first auction day, when Buddy sat alone and unwanted. Now laughter filled the farmhouse, and the quiet farm was a hub of community gatherings, filled with friendship and support. One crisp morning, Elias woke early to find Buddy already waiting at the door, alert and eager for their daily walk. The old dog's steps were still unsteady, but his spirit was strong. Elias smiled and reached for the new harness Emma had given them. Together they slowly made their way down the worn path leading through the fields. As they walked, Elias reflected on the journey, the lonely nights, the struggles with doubt, the small victories, and the growing bond that had pulled them both from darkness. But that day a surprise awaited them back at the farmhouse. Mary was waiting on the porch with a small group of neighbors, their faces bright with excitement. They held a simple wooden plaque, polished and carved with the words, "Buddy, our town's heart and soul." Elias's eyes widened in disbelief. "For Buddy?" he asked, voice thick. Mary nodded. "And for you, Elias, for showing us what kindness really means. The crowd cheered softly, and tears welled in Elias's eyes as he knelt beside Buddy, running a gentle hand over the dog's greying fur. Buddy seemed to understand, lifting his head proudly. The plaque was a symbol, a reminder of how a humble man's unthinkable act had changed lives. It wasn't about the dog's age or health, it was about the love and courage that had brought him home. That afternoon, the town gathered for a celebration unlike any before. Stories were shared, meals were passed around, and Buddy was the honored guest, receiving pats and treats from young and old alike. Elias stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. The man who had once been invisible now stood at the heart of a community transformed. Later, as the sun dipped low, Elias sat on the porch with Buddy nestled beside him. The old dog rested his head on Elias's lap, eyes closing in contentment. "I never imagined this," Elias whispered. "No one wanted you then, but now, you're loved more than ever." Buddy stirred slightly as if to say, "Thank you." In that moment, Elias understood something profound. Kindness has a way of coming back stronger than we expect. It doesn't matter how broken or old someone or something may seem. What matters is the heart willing to care. And so the story of the old dog no one wanted became a lasting legacy of hope, compassion, and the quiet power of one humble man's unthinkable act. As the stars filled the night sky, Elias and Buddy sat side by side, two souls forever changed by a second chance.